There is no criminal organization in the world that has made more money than the Mafia. The Mafia has been raking in billions of dollars every single year for decades now. Today, we will be looking at 8 of the most profitable Mafia racks ever exposed. Stick around until number 4, because it's one of the deadliest racks in history. Number 8, selling the fix. For decades now, the Italian-American Mafia had an alliance with the International Olympic Committee to ensure their bets always hit. This was probably the most blatant form of match fixing ever seen. Gamblers were able to easily make millions by betting on these fixed games. But the worst part is, the Mafia wasn't even trying to hide what they were doing. Newspapers would report on the games being rigged, and people would still place bets based on who the Mafia wanted to win. The odds would often be so off that if someone placed a $10 bet on the underdog, they would win $100. Fortunately, authorities didn't do anything about this corruption until 1960, when the scandal was brought up in the U.S. Senate. This led to several mobsters being arrested, along with some members of the International Olympic Committee. After this, the committee took several measures to ensure the games would never be fixed again. Number 7. Drugs. It comes as no surprise that the Mafia's involvement in drugs was going to land them on this list. In the early 1900s, Italian immigrants began arriving in the United States, and many of them found work in the coal mines of Pennsylvania. At first, it was a great opportunity for the Italian immigrants to make a decent living for themselves and their families. But things soon took a turn for the worse. As the years went on, the miners became fed up with how little pay they were receiving for such hard, dangerous work. Soon, strikes and protests were taking place almost every week. The mine owners knew they needed to do something before the miners demanded even higher wages or worse, started a union, so they turned to the Mafia for help. The Mafia infiltrated the miners' unions and began harassing the leaders. They would threaten them, beat them, and sometimes even murder them. This went on for several years until the Mafia had complete control over the miners. Now that they had control over the workers, the Mafia was able to get exactly what they wanted. They essentially worked for free, while the Mafia pocketed all the profits. The Mafia used this same tactic to take control of several other industries during the early 1900s. One of the most profitable sectors they targeted was the breweries. No, 6. Bootlegging. During the 1920s, the sale of alcohol was banned in the United States, but that didn't stop people from wanting to drink it. This created a huge black market for alcohol, and the Mafia was there to take advantage of it. The ban on alcohol turned out to be one of the greatest financial boons to the Mafia, as it allowed them to start their own illegal breweries, distilleries, and wineries. Not only did they have a steady flow of income coming in from bootlegging, but they were also able to expand into other areas of the criminal underworld. Because of the high demand for alcohol, the Mafia was able to charge exorbitant prices for their product. They also benefited from the fact that law enforcement was often corrupt and could easily be bribed. If you weren't willing to pay the Mafia for protection, then you ran the risk of your business being destroyed or worse, someone getting hurt. By the end of the 1920s, the Mafia had become one of the most powerful organizations in America thanks to bootlegging. Number 5. Gambling. From the moment gambling became popular, the Mafia knew they could make a lot of money by controlling it. That's why they quickly moved into the gambling industry after making their fortune in bootlegging. Controlling the casinos allowed the Mafia to collect money from both sides, whether someone won or lost. They also expanded into illegal gambling rings where they took huge bets on sports games. The thing about gambling is that it's very addictive, so once someone starts, they tend to keep coming back for more. This meant the Mafia had a steady flow of income from gamblers who couldn't control their habit. Of course, they also had to deal with other criminals trying to muscle in on their turf, but that just meant more money for the Mafia as they collected protection money from those trying to operate casinos or gambling rings. Number 4. Counterfeiting. If you think counterfeiting is just a small-time operation, then think again. Counterfeiting is actually a multi-billion-dollar industry, and the Mafia was one of the first organizations to realize its potential. During the early 1900s, the Mafia began producing counterfeit versions of popular brand name products. They would sell these fake goods to unsuspecting customers who thought they were getting a bargain. What they didn't realize was that they were helping the Mafia make millions. This racket continued for decades, and it was in tea until recently that law enforcement began cracking down on it. In fact, counterfeiting is still a major problem today, and it is estimated that it costs businesses billions of dollars each year. You might be surprised by how easy it is to buy counterfeit goods online. If you search for popular brands, there are a ton of websites that pop up selling their products for cheap. Even though we all know these are fake, someone always ends up buying them. This means the mafia is still making money from counterfeiting. But now they're doing it on a much larger scale. 3. Loan sharking. One of the most lucrative rackets the mafia ever got into was loan sharking. This is when they would lend money to people at extremely high interest rates, knowing that they would never be able to pay it back. The mafia would then use this debt to control the people they lent money to, and oftentimes they would end up owning them thousands of dollars. If you weren't able to pay back the mafia, they would often resort to violence, and this created a cycle of debt that was very difficult to escape. Today, loan sharking is still a major problem, and it is estimated that there are hundreds of thousands of people who are trapped in this cycle of debt. The scary thing is that loan sharks are everywhere, and they come from all walks of life. It's not just the mafia anymore. If you find yourself owing money to a loan shark, there is no escape. 2. Extortion. Extortion is another racket that the mafia has been involved in for decades. This is when they would threaten people and then take their money. The mafia was particularly good at extortion because they were experts at intimidation. If you didn't pay the mafia, they would often resort to violence, and this created a climate of fear that allowed them to extort millions of dollars from businesses. Even today, extortion is still a major problem, and it is estimated that it costs businesses billions of dollars each year. There are many different forms of extortion, and the mafia has been involved in all of them. One of the most common forms is when they would threaten to expose a business for some kind of illegal activity unless they paid the mafia. Another common form is when the mafia would simply threaten violence. Unless they were paid, no matter what form it takes, extortion is a serious crime that should not be taken lightly. 1. Murder. The most profitable mafia rack of all time is undoubtedly murder. For centuries, people have been willing to pay large sums of money to have their enemies killed. And the mafia was one of the first organizations to realize this. During the early 1900s, the mafia began offering murder-for-hire services. This meant that if you had an enemy, you could hire the mafia to take them out. Of course, this wasn't cheap, and it often cost tens of thousands of dollars, but for some people, it was worth the price. The mafia was particularly good at murders because they were experts at keeping secrets. If you hired them to kill someone, it was extremely unlikely that the truth would ever come out. This made murder for hire one of the most profitable rackets the mafia ever got into, and it's still going strong today. Alright guys, that's all for the day. See you next time.